So in the wake of the CNN BuzzFeed altercation with Trump, there was a fear that the media would start to turn on each other. And indeed, at least in some fashion, that did happen, with CNN putting out a statement immediately afterward, defending themselves and attacking BuzzFeed. And look, there are reasons you might want to do that. Those were two different news reports that Trump was putting together. The stuff that BuzzFeed had published, the stuff that CNN had reported on, were not the same thing, were hardly related, but they were lumped together by the president intentionally, and so CNN was defending themselves by attacking BuzzFeed. And I'm worried that, considering how much competition there is in the media, both on TV and online, that there is going to be a lot of willingness to sort of infight and tear each other down when we should be propping each other up against an assault of the likes we haven't necessarily seen in the history of America. Now, there are a couple of other people on TV worried about this. One, on Fox News, not someone you commonly see on this program, but we're going to turn now to Shep Smith.
President-elect Trump today told CNN's Jim Acosta that his organization amounts to fake news. CNN's exclusive reporting on the Russian matter was separate and distinctly different from the document dump executed by an online news property. Though we at Fox News cannot confirm CNN's report, it is our observation that its correspondents followed journalistic standards and that neither they nor any other journalists should be subjected to belittling and delegitimizing by the President-elect of the United States.
So that guy standing in front of all those gigantic iPads is, we don't often cover what he does on Fox News, but he does have more integrity seemingly than most people there.
And yeah.
I think he sees what's happening.
It's not seemingly. He's very different than the sort of the other. Though he may look robotic, he does not behave robotically in the same way that
or dogmatically.
Well, yeah, or robotically. I mean, either way, these people seem to be controlled by their network in the way that they speak about things, or they've found people that fit perfectly. But Shepard Smith does not fit in that way.
Yeah,
and I've been talking to people about this, just kind of non-journalists, and. A lot of them would just say, well, look, like the CNN or whoever attacked Trump and he's just fighting back. And I'm like, okay, but first of all, he's doing it in a ridiculous way. And second of all, when the president-elect, if the future president does stuff like that, it causes journalists to be less critical and speak out less.
Yeah.
And that affects the whole industry.
Yeah, less critical, but also theoretically less safe. I mean, let's not forget that journalists around the world have faced a lot of violence over the past few years. And seeing it here, where we've had, by the way, we've had journalists murdered on live TV in just the past couple of years, I believe it was. When you have people yelling out fake news and you have a president encouraging people to not trust a single thing that they say, but also that the lies they're telling are specifically designed to fool you, that's setting, I think, a potentially dangerous precedent.
Yeah.
But
now just let me just since you were talking about this, just quickly. Now I'll be the guy yelling Russia. You know, I mean, it's worth noting when Trump behaves that way to a journalist of how Vladimir Putin, who Trump unquestionably admires, right, and has been hasn't been bashful about saying how much he admires Putin. We know Putin killed at least one journalist, murdered him because of a serious investigation, and I presume has done worse to others. And so, yeah, I get a little scared when I see Trump behave this way. It was a way I anticipated getting scared, but it's still scary to see.
Yeah.
Part of how Putin came to power was actually kind of a fake news revolution. I was just reading about this. I guess a lot of his people were just trying to confuse people as to what's real and what's not, and it just kind of...
Yeah, they weren't ever as reliant on real news there, though, as we were.
Yeah, I've let my subscription to Pravda. No, was that the paper?
Pravda, yeah, Pravda.
I let it lapse.
So
the sports section is horrible.
A lot of hockey.
A lot of hockey.
So my fear is that even if journalists band together and sort of defend the concept of journalist integrity and inquiry, he is the president, and it looks like he's going to be able to do largely what he wants to do. But if we start to turn against each other, then I think we will be even less prepared to protect ourselves. But I want to turn to this last video where you're going to see Michael Moore echoing similar thoughts.
I'm glad Jim took the high road, but he could have easily said something like that.
An even higher road would have been for the next reporter.
That's what I said.
Did you say this on the air?
I said that last night. The next reporter should have said, I yield my time to Jim Acosta, or just restate Jim Acosta's question.
All journalists at this point must realize they are all in the same boat, and that this is a president that is going to attack the truth tellers. And so everyone has to have everybody else's back.
And yeah, and that's true. And look, I think that's true on the left too. And so I hope that the many things that we share here don't get in the way, because some people, some Democrats, some people on the left are not as progressive as others. I mean, there are things to criticize. This is not a don't criticize people on the left. Cory Booker, went from having people put their arms around him justifiably for standing up to Jeff Sessions to making a fairly unbelievably transparent and indefensible vote. And I hope that Cory Booker gets that message. We'll see. Cenk had a great tweet about that. Like, hey, man, I think he's missing it. And hopefully when he realizes who his constituents are and what the movement is, that he'll change his tune. And I thought that was a respectful way of putting that out there. But we need to stop arguing about Russia. Not that it's one of the biggest political stories of our lifetime, the Russian interference in our election. So the notion that we shouldn't talk about it or there's no evidence is criminally stupid.
Donald Trump says that he accepts the evidence.
It's overwhelming
His
evidence.
pick to head the CIA says the evidence is clear. Bernie Sanders says the evidence is clear. These are people who've actually read the evidence, unlike a lot of the critics.
We can do two things at once. We can talk about how Russia interfered in the election and got this guy elected and what that means. I don't know whether, I don't think, we certainly don't have any proof to suggest that he is a Russian patsy, right? We don't know. Worth investigating, but we don't know. But the idea that we're not going to talk about it because it's going to become our Benghazi, which is a thing going around Twitter among some on the left, an incredibly stupid thing on the left that's going around. So, we can do that, and we can also try to find ways to make sure we fight for health care and stand up for unions and start producing candidates and a leader of the DNC who will allow Democrats to take back some goddamn state houses. They'll allow them to take back some legislatures around the country and some governorships around the country. Excuse me.
Secretaries of State.
And some secretaries of state, and ways to fight infringements on the Voting Rights Act around the country. And as I said, ways to stand up to unions and change income inequality and start moving that slightly back and distribute wealth, which is what we've always done in the country, redistribute wealth. Do it in a fair, reasonable, and meaningful way and figure out what we're supposed to do in foreign affairs. We can do that while also saying, Jesus, Russia took the election from Hillary Clinton. For all her faults, that almost certainly happened. And understanding why James Comey did what he did. My sense is that he bumbled into it and it wasn't conspiratorial. But let's find out. All those things are interesting and worth talking about, and we can rub our bellies and pat our heads at the same time.
I would only say we can be concerned about that even if you don't think it was determinative. Whether you like what was revealed by the hacks or not, whether you think it had an effect or it didn't, something happened, we should look into it. And we can do that while being interested and concerned about all sorts of institutional reform and policy ideas and values.
Right. I like how Donald Trump tries to portray it as, we're just trying to be friends with Russia. I'm like, I don't think you understand what's going on.
If you like this Young Turks video, wait till you get a load of Young Turks membership. So many more shows and no ads at all. Come and see. tytnetwork.com/join.